And I think the key culture that we built is one around innovation, one around nimbleness, one around having no fear of failure, right? Accepting that failure is part of any pioneering work. Okay. I think that's important to kind of give people space to be able to fail and to be able to learn and to be able to move on and do that collaboratively, right?
Mm-hmm. And now, from San Francisco and the UCSF Rosenman Institute, the Health Technology Podcast with your host, Christine Winoto.
Translating complex medical technology into usable products often requires a simplification process. It involves asking yourself the question, can this device be used by your average provider or patient? While there's no shortage of life-changing technologies in healthcare, not all of them have undergone the simplification process. That said, Sandeep Akkaraju is one of the few who have realized the power of simplicity. At Echo Imaging, he's developing a high-performance ultrasound platform that gives providers answer, not just images. And in this episode, Sandeep discusses how he's adapted his medical imaging device to fit the future of medicine. Here's our conversation. Well, welcome, Sandeep. Thanks for joining me today.
Pleasure to be on the podcast, and thank you for having me. Really very inspirational work that you're doing out there.
Oh, thank you. You're so kind. Well, this is not your first rodeo, but I'd like to know about, share with our listeners a bit your background, your story on how you choose this path and how do you get here? What inspired you and who inspired you? I mean, that's a lofty question.
Clearly, it's been, I think, a long journey getting here, right? And Echo is my fourth startup that I'm involved with. And I think, really, I really look at what we're doing here at Echo as a culmination of a lot of experiences. I grew up in India, with my dad was an entrepreneur and an engineer, and a lot of my family was doctors. Okay, and really looking at rebuilding the country after the colonial period, right? So it was kind of pretty apparent to me from a fairly early age in terms of the power of technology from my father's side, and really importance of adequate healthcare across the world, right? Or the inadequacy of that. After my first startup that I was involved with got acquired, I had a chance to spend a year to 2 years backpacking, and that took me to some of the really very underprivileged parts of the world. Okay, spent a lot of time in West Africa, and in about 2015-16 timeframe, there was a World Health Organization report that really talked about how 75% of the world lacks any access to medical imaging. Okay, so, and then to me and to a lot of the other folks that are involved with the company, that was really the clarion call to kind of go and try and make an impact on that. My background, I have a background in engineering and physics, and it's always been, I guess I am one of those techno optimists, right? And in terms of really using technology in changing the economic value paradigm in a major way can happen. And the first startup that we did in the early days of the internet. I mean, we did a lot of the technologies for the backbone of the internet, and my last company prior to this was all of the motion sensing, which is now kind of going into watches and phones and AR, VR. But really, I mean, what was amazing about that is we could take equipment that was large, expensive, cumbersome, and using a combination of semiconductors, nanotechnology, a lot of software. And clearly the new element here at Echo is the AI, is really take something that was big and complex and put it under $1 on your wrist. So when we started Echo, we were like, hey, how do we kind of do that same thing in building medical imaging tools that are readily accessible, that can deliver extremely powerful image quality, yet fit into the pocket of the caregiver? And how do we build AI that makes it easy for every caregiver to both capture the images and to be able to interpret those medical images to get to answers, right? So as we started Echo, I mean, it was really about that, and the founding of the company to build build an imaging device that was really more than an imaging device, that it was actually an answering machine that gave you answers to complex medical medical issues, and give caregivers a quick look inside every patient.
Maybe you can describe a little bit what does Echo imaging product is. I know it's an ultrasound device that.
That's right.
Go ahead, explain to everybody.
So we're actually, I mean, if you look at, we looked at a lot of different imaging modalities, and it became quite clear to us. I mean, ultrasound was the only modality that was non-radiating, non-ionizing, that was safe to use in every situation. But it was expensive, because it's based on still World War II technologies, not based on Silicon Valley and silicon-based technologies. And it was cumbersome to use, right? I mean, it required a significant amount of training. If anybody's seen an ultrasound machine, there's kind of a lot of knobs and dials and a lot of expertise to operate that. So how do we kind of take all of that, make it into almost a point-and-shoot camera, with an app that looks like your camera, right? I mean, functions like a camera. And AI that automatically picks up the best images to be able to kind of, so that you can now start getting closer to a diagnosis. Okay. So that's the path that we're on. We're launching our hardware platform later this year. We've actually launched our workflow software and our analytics and billing revenue capture tools last year. And we've got several incredible AIs that have been already FDA cleared, and more coming, a strong pipeline of AIs that are going to make it easier and easier to use ultrasound, so that, so it doesn't take a sonographer to use it. Okay. So if you look at today, right? I mean, if you look at cardiac sonography as an example, we've got 330 million Americans, right? And yet you have 20,000 trained sonographers who can actually use a tool, to be able to get to an answer, right? So the industry as a whole, I mean, when you look at the majors, they've kind of been focused on shipping a big box that very few people can use, right? How do we change that not in a small way, but in a big way, not incrementalism, but reimagining all of that?
So you're saying that who is going to be the user? Who is the user of Echo devices now? It's not the sonographer. It's like the primary care.
So we're starting off in the acute care space initially. And over time, I mean, our goal absolutely is to be able to kind of get this to the mainstream user. Initially, we're targeting nurses and doctors directly at the point of care. Okay, in acute care as a starting point, and really as people become more familiar with this and the AI becomes more powerful, we see these tools making their way into the office and eventually into the home as well. I mean, we have pilots going on right now with major EMT companies, okay, where they're training EMTs, okay, with our tools to be able to do some of these scans at home. Okay, so if you have a acute case, 20% of acute care in the U.S. is moving towards the home, right? And that's a pretty major shift of a $60-80 billion value pool towards the home, right? So now, how do we enable caregivers at home to get answers about a patient's health? So that's some of the things that we are actually kind of in trials right now.
Are you thinking more like it becomes like a thermometers that we all have at home?
Eventually, I mean, I do see that path. Over the arc of time, I mean, really, as I kind of look at it, I mean, our goal is, we look at Echo, we look at ourselves as tool makers, right? I mean, and absolutely, we want to be able to use the same tools that we make for doctors and caregivers. I mean, we see this as part of your medicine cabinet over a period of time. Right. And the beauty of silicon-based technologies is you can continue to aggressively shrink these devices. Okay. So we're actually moving to a path where this is going to be a patch. Okay. That is a wearable device. If you're a high-risk pregnancy or a high-risk post-operative patient, okay, that this becomes a wearable device that actually gives you a good look into the body, right? And monitors the body. So, and that's a trajectory over time that we kind of look at this moving towards.
Okay. So this is your, not the first, this is your fourth company that you founded. And I want to take you more the journey about what are the lessons learned that you learned in the first time that it's like, oh, I would never repeat the same mistake. But then sometimes it's still this, every company has to go through the same mistake sometimes, or maybe that's not true.
I think part of it is, to me, I mean, ultimately, I think the number one thing that I've learned is, we all think of building, people want to kind of build moonshots or whatever they call them, right? I mean, usually they kind of look at products as the moonshots. But ultimately, I mean, the most important thing that you're building is the people and the culture, right? It's the people and the culture that build the product. Okay. And so, too many companies kind of focus heavily on product, which may be the rocket to kind of get them where they want to go. But the culture and the people are your rocket fuel. If you don't pay attention to that, you ain't going nowhere, right? I mean, that is the number one thing for me is ultimately, to make the kind of products that we do today. It's no longer about individual achievement, right? It's about teams working on complex problems. Okay. I mean, whether it's kind of business model problems or whether it's kind of, technical engineering problems or AI or science problems, right? So ultimately, to me, you start off by building strong teams and strong culture that can ultimately deliver amazing products. That to me was kind of, is I think one of the key things that I've learned is the right team focused on the right market opportunity is important. The one thing that's kind of, I think I've learned is building great teams and having great teams work on really hard problems. Okay. And believing that you can kind of get there. Okay. And face off a lot of lot of issues and a lot of problems. That is kind of how progress happens, and that's how I feel like when you start a venture, you have to focus on these big problems. Okay, if you want to do incrementalism, you could go join any of the big companies where you kind of making the N+1 version of a product, right? I mean, or making incremental things to able to do something. Startups to me have to focus on big things that can move humanity forward in a big way.
This podcast is sponsored by Brown Rudnick's Global Life Sciences Group, a team of legal professionals that help life science companies, lenders, and investors around the world turn good science into good business. Learn more at brownrudnick.com. This podcast is also sponsored by Canon Quality Group. Canon Quality Group has been helping medtech startups set up quality management systems for over 10 years. If you're unsure when to get started with quality management in your startup, turn to the experts at canonqualitygroup.com.
So, a lot of people mention about culture and a team. What is the culture that you're trying to have, and why that works for Echo? Do you think the culture that you built for Echo is very similar to the culture from the previous companies that you were in?
I think the I'll start with the second question first because it's easier to answer. I think part of it is maturity, right? I mean, I think, the previous companies, we didn't necessarily pay as much attention to culture as a key goal, right, of what we're trying to do. And I think, and that's been the lesson for me, is once you kind of consciously start focusing on that, a lot of, and building teams around that. Okay. And because I think ultimately, the key, for what we are trying to build out here is really a company that can continue to put out some amazing products. Okay, year after year is what we want to kind of build at Echo. We're a very product oriented company, and the culture that we've kind of created is a very product focused culture that's focused on, and to me, products are ultimately about serving communities, right? I mean, building tools that serve communities, in this case, healthcare communities at large, and building really valuable tools. And I think the key culture that we built is one around innovation, one around nimbleness, one around having no fear of failure, right? Accepting that failure is part of any pioneering work. Okay. I think that's important to kind of give people space to be able to fail and to be able to learn and to be able to move on and do that collaboratively, right? And to be able to, and that's
do you have a framework, or do you have a set of example models that you have to do so that your team know that? Because everybody would say like, oh, we want you to feel okay that failure is okay, but is there like an incentive,
right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you have to model that, right? I mean, you have to model that, and kind of you have to model and have people kind of experiment and fail and change and and pivot from that, right? So. And part of it is it requires, one of the things is, as a culture, it's not hard to celebrate. It's difficult to celebrate failure, right? It's difficult to kind of say, okay, we failed at something. Okay. But
how do you do that?
I think we're trying to get better at it. Let me kind of put it that I don't have an answer. Maybe in kind of a few years as we kind of build up more institutional knowledge around celebrating failure, I'll get back. But but I think part of it is openness, right? And to be able to have transparency around failure. and while still having accountability, right? I mean, I think it's important in pioneering work to kind of make sure that you have a plan A, B, C at times, so that you feel like, okay, I'm going to go try this, but if not, this is the backup, and this is the backup. And sometimes it's difficult to plan that way, right? I mean, and I think COVID's kind of really accelerated that in terms of when the world went topsy-turvy, right? I mean, we had to experiment in a lot of different ways, and getting teams to be able to try different things. And I think everybody's acceptance of trying new things and developing a hardware product, okay, it's hard, and doing that during COVID with shutdowns and, all of that was even more difficult. But I think a key part of it is, ability to build a culture of trust, okay, where you kind of have people have each other's back, right, and explicitly have each other's back, okay, and is important, because I think, so those are just kind of a few of the areas that I'd suggest to your audience to keep in mind. In terms of, building a culture that kind of, is not afraid of failure.
When your team is small, everybody's kind of in it together. The culture is kind of similar, because probably when you started, you bring in folks that you knew. But as the company grow, how do you make sure that culture is staying intact? And is there like a pragmatic framework or tool that you follow? Like, you come down, like indoctrinate everybody who joined?
I think, listen, to a certain degree, part of it is, we wear, you need to wear your culture on your sleeve a little bit too, right? I mean, and part of it is, I think, the hiring process is one of the most difficult things that any person can do, right? I mean, and I think, and even there, we know we're going to make mistakes, and being open to kind of making mistakes and admitting that we maybe not hired somebody who's not a great fit. But I think thinking through that hiring process, it's important to kind of look through and have people who share similar values, and also kind of motivated by similar things. But at the same point, we tend to hire not just based on kind of, the IQ person, right? It's also, there's the emotional quotient. But I think more important than that today, to build these complex products, the relationship quotient is super important, okay, in terms of almost understanding the RQ of the person. For lack of a better word, is how do you bring people who can build bridges, okay, because increasingly the work that we do is very, very cross-functional between, silicon engineering and chip design to clinicals to industrial design and AI. So it's and it takes a lot of work to kind of make sure that there's no silos, right, and that people are working towards the same goal in terms of delivering integrated product, as opposed to a bunch of features that are loosely coupled, right? That feels and spend a lot of time in working with the customer and working back from the customer to the technology rather than the other way around, right? And it takes a huge amount of effort to be able to do that. And that requires people who have a special talent of building bridges, okay, within an organization, with customers, with institutions, with payers, right? So so we'll look for people who are kind of naturally, bridge builders. Okay? And I think it's kind of, listen, I'm sure everybody's kind of seen sometimes, hiring the wrong, you also need to pay attention to the X factor, right? You've got a team and you've got to think about, hey, what can I kind of do to kind of bring somebody else in who's got an X factor, who can actually shake things up, who can kind of look to do things differently. So those are all kind of important aspects on kind of team building that I've learned within the framework of a company like that, right? I mean, what applies at Echo may not apply everywhere else, right? I mean, we've chosen to be kind of, to run the company in a very open manner. Okay. But, and I give the team, almost the same, same visibility that I give the board, right? I mean, in terms of what's happening. And again, that formula may not work, okay, in other situations where you may have a more top-down driven organization. But it's a choice, right? Like everything is a choice on how you run things and how you move things forward.
You mentioned earlier about because of the nature of the product, the people that you have to work together, that you bring somebody who can be the bridge. What are the characteristics that you look at because I assume that it's always good and everybody can be bridge, because no matter where you are, I think the bridge person can always be helpful to have. Like, what are the characters that you see that's important, that usually represent somebody who can be a bridge?
I think part of it is transparency, right? I mean, I think very often in organizations, people who can be candid, but also know how to approach that from kind of with the appropriate emotional quotient, right? And communication. So I think strong communication skills are absolutely, important. Okay. That doesn't mean that there's no place for kind of really strong individual performers, right? You need a combination of that as well. But I mean, I can tell you what kind of people we don't want is people who end up being passive aggressive about things, right?
They are not really fun to be with.
Yeah. So, but again, I mean, I think the key things that we will look for is just ability to communicate, ability to kind of have empathy, ability to kind of, really, is this a person that can also kind of have grace under pressure, right? I mean, that's so important. There's going to be things that go wrong and will go wrong. But, I think understanding, I think grace is a term that you don't hear very often in kind of hiring, right? I mean, but I think it's important.
I think sometimes it's hard to see the real characters until the stress happen, right?
Exactly.
And, but
I think even those things can be learning moments in how you approach it, right? I mean, sometimes it's kind of, hey, it's not like, people are I think as humans, I mean, we most people want to kind of, be part of a bigger thing. And, but again, I mean, it's important to pay attention to that very almost intuitive, not intuitively, but kind of pay attention to that as you kind of, onboard people and see how they kind of do as well.
Yeah. So one of the things that you guys raised your last round in 2021, which is great. And so that's a big round. And so there's a lot of, oftentimes when you raise a lot of money, means you have to do a lot to deliver. What are the things that you are excited about that's coming on Echo that you're looking forward to? And what are the challenges that that's coming facing you too?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that happened with us as we raised that round right after that was just the global supply chain meltdown, especially in the high tech. Right. I mean, we couldn't get chips and we couldn't get other things required to launch a product. Okay, so I think that's kind of and we've had to invest big in the supply chain side of things to shore up supply. Okay. At the same point, I mean, we've actually made investments in on the factory side of things, and we're actually reshoring. Okay, some of the advanced silicon assemblies back to Silicon Valley, right? I mean, I think I've been as guilty as the next person in offshoring silicon. Now we're, I think, so that was a pretty big thing in securing the supply and making sure that we're on the right track. At the same point, I mean, we've made kind of, investments in the AI side and accelerating our AI roadmap. We actually ended up acquiring a company, amazing company out of Canada last year. Okay, that's focused on making ultrasound really simple to use. Okay, and we've been kind of working really hard on kind of integrating some high performance hardware. Okay, with some incredible smarts that hopefully kind of allow more people to become to be able to use these devices. I mean, the iPhones made everybody into photographer, right? I mean, and we're hoping to make the world into sonographers.
I think I'm looking forward to have one of those in my home. I think that'll be fun.
Well, I think, FDA willing over an arc of time, I mean, that's where we're headed. I mean, we'd like to think that's where we're headed with these kind of technologies. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I tell our folks, I mean, hey, we're building some advanced tools. Let's make sure we can use them, right? Yeah. I mean, if I can use them with very little medical background, then, then a lot of other people can.
Although I'm sure you think about this. If I'm using it at home, I'll be like looking at things. I was like, oh my God, this is, and then, you panic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think
how do you know that is something that you really have to worry about? It's just like, I always just...
Listen, I mean, I think there's plenty of these Black Mirror situations, right? I mean, that will emerge and clearly, and I think I don't want to kind of give audience a wrong impression. That's not where we're headed immediately, right? I mean, we're focused at the get-go in acute care spaces, right. Okay, in places. But I think, we do have an eye towards that. I mean, as we look at it, I mean, the goal for the company is to move from kind of, instruments into appliances. Okay. I mean, so the goal for us is, how do we even kind of in terms of as we get into the home, okay, how do we kind of have a product that gives you an answer as opposed to giving you an image, right? So if you can get a consistent answer out of something, okay, then you're not kind of worrying about like, what does this image mean? And am I seeing something here? Or not seeing something there? I mean, the last thing, I think I really feel that powerful technology needs to disappear. Okay, it needs to become commonplace. I mean, for it to become commonplace, it needs to disappear to get into the civilizational layer, right? I mean, and to be able to do that, we need to kind of remove, even continue to simplify it, wherein you're kind of getting to an answer. I mean, for instance, maybe a device that's kind of if you have, I don't know, that can be used at home to be able to screen for something, right, on a regular basis. Okay, as opposed to delivering an image and kind of putting the onus on somebody to say, "Gee, what does this mean?"
Yeah,
does that
I'm
make
looking
sense?
for home mammogram. I think that would be great. Next.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that's kind of the kind of things that big challenges that we need to kind of work on at Echo, right? I mean, and so in terms of being able to screen at the comfort of your own home and get an answer. I mean, if things are suspicious or not, right? I mean, not necessarily kind of show you a bunch of images and then you kind of left consulting Dr. Google or or worse, Dr. ChatGPT to kind of figure out what that means. Right? I mean, we don't want to do that. That's just adding to a problem. Okay, in terms of and once we're ready to kind of say, hey, here's an AI that makes it simple to be able to scan your breast and get an answer, right? Or get something that's actionable, and clearly we don't, and I think that comfort is super important as we move forward.
Yeah. So, what are the next major milestones that you kind of set yourself, not as a company, as a person? What are the things that you are challenging yourself to achieve? That
honestly, Christine, I think right now I'm at a point where we're on a day by day basis. And part of it is really my big thing, like most people, is making sure that you have a life that's well lived, right? And to be able to do that, as I look at it, it's simply saying, hey, am I doing the right set of actions for today? Okay, that I'm satisfied with, right? And so I that's my approach to life, right? And my feeling is grand plans are clearly, dreams and grand plans are important, and right now, where my mind is making sure we can deliver a kick-ass product, right? That's where my focus is.
That's great. Well, thank you. Thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing your insight, and thanks for sharing your story.
Oh, thank you so much, Christine, for having me up here, and really enjoyed the conversation. It's really challenging set of questions that made me stop and think and answer.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for being a good sport.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Health Technology Podcast. We want to thank our executive producer, Herminio Neto, and our podcast engineer, Andrew Rojek. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. The Health Technology Podcast is available on all major platforms.